Thank you for joining the Broadway Drumming 101 podcast with your host, Clayton Craddock.
Welcome to Broadway Drumming 101. My name is Clayton Craddock, and my guest today is Dan Weiner. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
I'm wonderful. Finally get to actually see you, even though we met briefly many years ago and haven't run into each other on the Broadway campus, but we're actually in contact now. But I gotta say, after doing some of my little research on you, I found something that was fascinating to me outside of the fact that you've done the Cher show and other things on Broadway. I want to talk to you about the stuff that you've done on TV. NBC's America's Got Talent. I just want to start there. How did you get into something like that? And how long did you play for America's Got Talent?
I got into that show it was kind of interesting. It's kind of, you have to know people. I know the creative director of that show. The creative director of that show is a guy, I don't know if he still officially is or not, because they went back out to LA, but his name is Brian Burke. And Brian is a tap dancer, a fantastic tap dancer who himself transitioned into all kinds of creative direction stuff. And so my wife was a good friend of his and a sort of small group of dancers that all came up together. And so he was a creative director of that show. And then another good friend of ours, whose name is Brooke Wendell, was the choreographer for that show. And so they were in the midst of the very first season in New York. The show was based in LA, but then Howard Stern became a judge. And so they literally moved the entire show to New York for him because he would not go to LA. And so the first year was at NJPAC. And so they needed musicians. They had an amazing music contractor I don't know if you've run across Jill Delabate at all, but Jill's awesome. But, not to get too granular, but too early, but the way that those contracts work, those union contracts work, if it's less than 6 musicians, they can just hire a leader, like a band leader, to bring people in. And so they hired me as that because they wanted me to bring in some of the folks that they knew that I was in contact with, and some younger folks and people that would match with the look of some of the contestants that happen to be younger, because it's all very last minute with those kinds of shows. And so whoever comes in and whoever is the talent, they're trying to surround them with people that look like they belong on stage with them. And on top of that, every week they are going through, because they compete weekly, they are going through creatives of what they're going to sing and what it's going to look like and what the concept is and all that other stuff. And then once they agree on the song and the concept and the look, etc., then they decide what musicians they're going to hire for that. And so we want a bass player and we want a guitar player and we want this and we want that. Great, hire them. And then all of a sudden it's like a scramble to find people that are available, are the right look, are capable, obviously, of playing the material, etc. And it's like a casting. You submit people to be considered by the creative team, and then they basically cast it, and they trust you that you're going to bring in people that are capable of doing all the things that is required for television, which is being on time for the camera block and being prepared with the material and being able to take direction from the choreographer or the camera director or the creative director, and being able to just do the performance. And TV is interesting. It's not theater. You kind of have to be performative but not overly so, because then it looks sort of too much. Or in the case of a show that's a competition like that, like, you are not supposed to be like taking any kind of focus. So you're supposed to look animated and you're supposed to look engaged. And this is supposed to be like even though everybody knows that these are contestants and they do a whole backstory on them. And like this one guy was like he works in a coal mine in West Virginia, like obviously like, I don't think, maybe I'm wrong about this. I don't think people think we are also from the coal mine in West Virginia, but we are his band for that performance. And so we're supposed to look like we know him and play with him, and that he's comfortable on stage with us, and yet sort of sink into the background, and just be there and be present. So it's kind of, it's a funky thing. Television is a very, very different medium than theater is, or just live performances in general. So yeah, and also for drums, sometimes you are playing live and sometimes you are playing to a track that has been pre-recorded, because it's like full on music production. There's a music director who is also a music producer for that show. Is this guy named Graham Stack, and he's producing a lot of the music for that show, and they want it to sound like a record or like a pop record. That they're not trying to always have it sound like a live band, and so you are often learning verbatim, note for note, these drum tracks basically as you're going along. But what that means is that drums look cool, so then there's a gigantic camera that is zoomed in on your drum fill, and if anybody is a musician, you don't have to be a drummer, and the drummer's playing one thing and the sound is totally different, like you can't really get away with that. And so it's kind of an interesting proposition to learn those kinds of things, and for the presentation of it, have it look the way that it's supposed to look, and make sure that it reads properly. But you can also be sent the track for the camera block, and then you come in for the camera block and they're like, oh yeah, we redid parts of that track, and then the drum fill is not what it used to be. And so then you come in, you're like, oh, and then you have to relearn it for the rehearsal, which is the same day as the actual shoot. So then you have to come in, but it's, that's just how it works. And it's no different than, I guess, than subbing, as we're talking about, Broadway and subbing and all that other stuff. It's no different than that, where you learn it and you learn what in this case, the producer did, or what you would learn for the drummer would be on a particular show. But that's how you sort of handle it. And then you just run it 1,000 times so you could go up there once the lights are on and the cameras are on and all that stuff, and just be able to make it look right.
So speaking of learning things, I understand you went to East Carolina University, but
I did.
I don't even know where that is.
That is in Greenville, North Carolina.
Were you born in North Carolina?
No, I was born in Florida, actually. I was born in West Palm Beach, Florida.
Ah, West Palm Beach. All right.
But I grew up mostly in Connecticut.
What part of Connecticut?
I grew up in Avon, Connecticut, which is outside of Hartford.
Yeah, I grew up in Manchester. That's so interesting.
Oh, there you go. I was literally in Manchester 2 weeks ago.
Really?
Yeah, I have family there. Yeah, my cousin lives there. That's crazy. I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Gary Seligson, also drummer from Dancing. We also have a crazy connection to my uncle, who has since passed, whose name is Paul Brown, and he was a jazz musician, jazz bass player, and so the Hart School of Music and everybody surrounding you probably know this already, obviously, but everybody surrounding that community and all these amazing jazz musicians who were probably in New York forever and then moved out to Connecticut, maybe to live in a house or teach out there or whatever. Gary came up playing with my Uncle Paul, which I had no idea until he randomly came upon it at Dancing when we were chatting about it. But yeah, Connecticut. So I grew up there. And then in high school, my dad got a job in Virginia. So then we moved down there in the middle of high school. And when I was there, I was taking private lessons with this amazing percussionist named Aubrey Adams, who played for, I think either the President's Own band or the very, very top military band. And he's an amazing percussionist. He taught our marching drum line in high school, but I also took privately with him. And he was a good friend of Mark Ford, who was the head of percussion at East Carolina.
Okay.
So I ended up going down there. through Aubrey, and meeting Mark. Mark is now the head of percussion at North Texas.
What made you get into playing drums?
It's the weirdest thing. I knew I wanted to play drums for my entire life before I ever started playing. I had this like very weird, in retrospect, weird. At the time, it felt natural, but this feeling of like, I am going to do this, even though I was literally like miserable on a drum pad because my parents were very kind of like practical and incremental about, they weren't like, here's a drum set as your very first drum thing. It was like they listened to the school, and the school recommended get them a drum pad. And if they express interest, then get them a snare drum. And then after you get them a snare drum, maybe, you could get a drum set, that kind of thing. And so I was just excited about it. And I just always loved drums and drumming and watching drummers. And so I just sort of always wanted to do it. And I played the piano as well, for a couple of years. But then my piano teacher moved away, and then I didn't really want to keep going. So I ended up sticking with the drums, and here we are.
Were there any drummers that you were idolizing when you were growing up?
Yes, the list is long, but because my Uncle Paul was exposing me to all of this jazz music, which is like blowing my mind. I was obsessed with a lot of jazz drummers. So I was obsessed with like Philly Joe, and I was obsessed with Art Blakey and Elvin Jones. Buddy Rich was like mind-blowing, crazy, chops, and he was just an absolute force. But I ended up kind of more gravitating towards those other guys, and like Max Roach, and those ended up sort of being the guys that I was just obsessed with and kept listening to. And so, yeah. And then also through my uncle, I ended up getting to play way out of my depth, but I was part of the Artist Collective. I don't know if you ever played there or knew what that was, but it was basically Jackie McLean, who's for those who don't know, a very incredible and famous jazz musician, saxophone player from back in the day. He ran the Artist Collective, and there was basically like the top jazz band of all of the performing arts high schools in Connecticut, and some really like unbelievable, fantastic players. And my Uncle Paul kind of like got me in there, and they were all like seniors in high school or juniors, and they were incredible. And I was going into my freshman year, and they put up two Art Blakey like Jazz Messengers tunes, and I was just like swimming in it and doing my best to survive. And Jackie was very old school and very tough and really pushing everybody, including me. He didn't care that I was like young or like whatever. He was just like ready to go and ready to do it. And so it was really super challenging and very terrifying, honestly, as a kid. But I got to learn more of the ins and outs of that in that sense, Art Blakey's style, because I was obsessing and listening to the records a million times, and just really trying to go for it. And it was an awesome experience in retrospect. And when I still listen to Art Blakey and Elvin and people like that, it's just mind blowing and amazing stuff.
Did you see yourself being a professional jazz musician in New York City?
I was definitely like all in on it and loved playing it. I guess by the time I was really considering New York City in any kind of way, I don't think that I thought I was going to do that, because I had like moved to Virginia and had different experiences there, and at East Carolina, Mark Ford, he is he's like a marimba master specialist person. So there was a lot more classical percussion focus there, which is also great because it was enlightening in a whole other world that you definitely didn't, at least I did not experience in Connecticut in any kind of like significant way. And I experienced more in Virginia when I moved down there for high school, and then in college, like that was really the focus. So by the time I was considering like what I was going to do after, I definitely knew that I wanted to perform, but I didn't necessarily think that I was going to like come to New York and play jazz.
You went to East Carolina to study drums, percussion, jazz performance.
It was technically performance and education because my parents were definitely very like, also get an education degree because who knows what's going to happen. And, I think that that's sort of very common and understandable, which is that, like, yes, if you want to play, that's amazing, but it's hard for, certainly I'm a parent. I know that you're a parent as well. You want your kids to have stability and have income and have a quote unquote good life. And so, they wanted me to get an education degree in case for whatever reason the playing didn't work out and I could teach and have a degree. And so it was basically I was doing drum set. I was playing in the jazz bands there. And then I was doing all the classical percussion curriculum. And then I was starting to get into the actual education elements of the whole thing. But then I ended up getting a gig and leaving school. But so I was kind of getting to do a bunch of different stuff. And I sang in all the choirs and the musicals in high school as well. So I was starting to sing a little bit in college as well, but certainly not part of the vocal department or anything, but starting to do that kind of stuff as well. So I was kind of getting it all as much as I could.
Was the gig that you got Stomp?
Yes.
So tell me about you're 19 and you auditioned for Stomp and you left school to come to New York?
I did. I actually auditioned when I was 17 and when I was in high school, and I lied because they said you have to be 18 to audition. And my voice teacher at the time, a very good friend of mine, his name is Jim Vance Like, he, it was before internet and all that stuff. And so he had Backstage magazine or Backstage, whatever that little newspaper is. And in the back of it, they posted auditions, usually for actors. And they had a posting for Stomp. And so I came up and auditioned as a high school student and made it all the way through the finals. And then was basically like in this waiting period where they're like, we'll let you know. And then, I had gotten into East Carolina and I had planned to go there, but I was waiting to see if Stomp was going to call, and then they weren't calling, and I was, it's like sort of that terrifying. It's terrifying now. I don't want to call people now to ask if I got the job or not. But when I was, 17, and I was like, am I going to call the Stomp office to ask and like try to push them to make a decision if I am getting hired or not? But I ended up finally, like, because ECU was like, so are you coming or are you not coming? Like, what's the deal? Like, they have to, like finish their process for students that are coming in. And so eventually I had to call and ask them. And the general manager for the show was like, basically, we'll get back to you and we'll try to push the creators of the show to make a decision, which was terrifying. And then they got back and they were very nice, but they were basically like, we're not going to hire you right now. And so then I went to college, and then it came up again. The audition came up again when it was going to be like right after like Thanksgiving break in my sophomore year. And I went back up and I auditioned again. And my mom, I have to include this story because this is like my mom's favorite story of all time, which is that we got in, it's like open call, thousands of people, very popular show, very funky, like downtown, whatever, thousands of people at West Beth. I don't know if you were ever over there. It's down in the West Village, but it's this, West Village. And it's like this massive warehousey kind of space. And we got in there, and we were in like a holding room, and there was a bunch of people in there, and the casting director came in and he said, has anyone here ever auditioned for the show before? And a bunch of people, including me, we raised our hands. And he was like, we can't tell you to leave, but we are asking that you don't audition again. And because there were so many people, they were trying to like, sort of pare it down a little bit. And I was like, oh my God, like I came all the way here. And I obviously think I have a pretty good shot at this because I got so far the last time, et cetera. But I was 19 and there was like all these, like New York actory and New York musician people that were like in this audition flow. And I just seemed to be like a little bit of a fish out of water. And somebody else, thank God, like raised their hand and was like, I auditioned before, but I made it all the way through the finals. So I thought I should, literally exactly my same thought. So I thought that I should audition again. And the casting director said, well, then they've seen a lot of you.
Damn.
Because there's 3 rounds of, you go through this 3-round process for the auditions. And so basically I was like, oh my God, am I going to leave? Are we all leaving? Like, what's happening? And then nobody left. Everybody, because they were basically like, we can't tell you to leave, but we're asking you to leave. And so literally nobody got up. And so I was like, okay, probably if everybody got up, I would have also gotten up because I didn't really know what any of the protocols were, how it all works or whatever, but I didn't know. And so everybody stayed. And then when I actually went into the audition, you're in like this big semicircle and, it's all like very vibey and stompy. And one of the creators of the show came up and he said, nice to see you again. And I said, nice to be here. And then I got hired that time when I came in there.
All right. So I saw the show maybe once or twice. It was fascinating. I think I brought my kids when they were really young. They probably couldn't understand it. Same thing with Blue Man Group. Mm-hmm. Fascinating drumming shows. I actually auditioned for the Blue Man Group drumming chair.
Nice.
The guy was playing so hard, and I tried to play. He's like, play this. And I was like, there are certain drummers that play really, really loud, but also musical, like Gary Selleck, and he plays really heavy at times.
Yeah.
But this guy's really, really heavy, and I just couldn't compete. Plus, I just blew the audition. But I love Blue Man Group, and I love Stomp too because of the creativity. What did you have to do to audition for Stomp?
They basically, so the Stomp thing is like, you have to be able to look, the breakdown is always dancers who drum and drummers who dance. That was like the original thing. And so you had to be able to obviously play and make music with these like very non-traditional instruments, which is super challenging. And it ends up being a whole trajectory even after you get hired, where you're trying to figure out how to make music with these very weird and non-traditional instruments like brooms and poles and garbage cans and all this other stuff where it's not natural. And so that is basically, you have to go in there. The very first audition, all that they do, I think, is hands and feet, which is like what it sounds like, where you're doing like literally stomping and clapping your hands, and they teach you this basic groove that is like sort of the heartbeat of that whole number and the groove of that whole number. And so that alone, I think, shows them a whole lot about who is comfortable taking on that kind of material, who's comfortable translating that to their body in a way where you can move. And, obviously learning quickly because there's a ton of material in the show. And so they teach you that. And then also within that first audition, you go into and you solo. And so you have to basically use your own creativity and your own way of, figuring out and improvise rhythmically, et cetera. And you go into the middle of the semicircle and you do basically like a 4-bar improvised solo, which is pretty heavy to go in. Like it's everybody people sitting at this table and just kind of watching and being cool Stomp people, because the Stomp people are already cool, especially from the outside looking in, and you're trying to be cool and you're trying to be this whole thing. For the drummers, you're like, cool, I can play with drumsticks, or I can play on my legs and play with my hands, but like, can you integrate your whole body into it, and can you do anything that might look semi interesting, and can you stay in time when you're in the midst of trying to navigate all of those things at the same time and play something maybe musical and interesting? It's so. And then the dancers have the other challenge, which is that they don't necessarily play the drums or they play a little bit, and so they can move really well, but they have to be able to play and make rhythms and do all that kind of stuff. And so that's the first round, and then they cut a lot from that round. And then the second round, they give you a big, 6-foot wooden pole and a hammer handle, and then it starts to get really nuts, because then there's like much more coordination that starts to happen. And are you slamming the pole on the ground? Are you hitting the pole with a hammer handle? Are you stomping your foot? Are you stomping your left foot, your right foot? It's like, are you lifting, you like throw up the poles and hit them and they get a tone? Like, it starts to get complex pretty quickly. And so you get into that. I think they gave us brooms in the second audition. And then in the third and final audition, you do all of those things again. And then they just keep adding on, where they give you garbage can lids that you hold in your hands, and you have to do some movement with that. And they just start to get into more and more of the show and start to sort of like try to pull out more and more people's personalities and see where they might fit. And so that's it. So you just go through that whole crazy process, and then, luckily I got hired. And it's like anything. It's like right time, right place. Like, they weren't hiring an entire cast. They were hiring people for particular roles. They needed the roles that I ended up doing at that particular time. So I was even considered in the first place. Otherwise, they would have hired somebody else that they needed for a completely different part, because there was some things that were much more dance heavy or acting comedy heavy, or obviously drum heavy, depending on the role.
How long were you with the production?
I was off and on for 12 years.
Wow.
Yeah, I did like 4 years straight from when we trained to when I like officially left. And then, like I was mentioning before when we were chatting before we got on, that you can't bring in subs as you could for a Broadway show and just tell people like, learn the book. And then they go learn the book and they watch however many times, and they, watch the conductor video and all the things that you get to do now. Like, that show is a whole 5-week training process. And so there's no like bringing in your own people. And so when they need somebody to come in, fill in, they do what you might do for a Broadway show for actors or for dancers now, which is that they call the people that have already done it. If they just need somebody to come in because they already know the show and they've already trained and they know all the ins and outs of how it works. And so that's kind of the way for all of the alumni, is that if you're in town and interested and available, and they need you, then you come in and you work. So I ended up coming in for 2 or 3 years, or maybe even longer, just as a sub. And then I ended up going back into the New York company for a couple of years, and then finally being done after all that. But it was a lot of that.
You moved to New York from college. Was that job, I should say, a thing that you could support yourself with by solely doing that show?
It was at the time. At the end of the day, Stomp was still off Broadway, and was for the entire run, which I think is probably the only way that it could have survived as long as it did. I think it was smart to be where they were, at the Orpheum, which is down in East Village, for those who don't know. But yeah, so the pay is not Broadway scale. And so, especially when you're training, like, it is, quite frankly, not great. But it was doable to live. I lived out in Queens, out in a store at the last stop on the N train, like in a basement apartment. It was not some glamorous, like, I'm in the hit show and I'm blah, blah. It was like, that kind of trajectory. But it was, I didn't at the time feel like I had to get a second job or be working any other time during that period, and I can just focus on doing the show. And at the end of the day, it's also very time consuming and also very energy consuming. It's a ton of work to learn. And also you're kind of like a dancer, except you're not a dancer. So you're doing like dancer maintenance kinds of things, like having to get massage, and which all sounds very glamorous, except it's not. It's really just like literally surviving it. So because you're doing all of this movement that you are not all that qualified to do as far as your understanding of how to move your body in a healthy way, and that's a steep learning curve as well, especially for the drummers in that show, because it's just not necessarily, unless you happen to grow up dancing as well. Most of the drummers are figuring out how to do it and how to make all these sounds, but then sometimes you're making all these sounds and doing all these movements, but you end up injuring yourself. So there's lots of learning involved in that way, but that is also time consuming, because then you're going to physical therapy, or you're going to get a massage, or you're going to a doctor, or like, it's all part of what is very common for dancers and is less common for drummers.
So you were in New York at age 19. Did you have ideas of what else you'd like to do? Was playing drums on a Broadway show your thing? Was going on tour with a rock band or playing at the Grand Ole Opry? Was that your main goal? Did you have any like specific focus, or you were just here like this? I'm doing Stomp, and did you have other things that like I want to do that too? I want to do this too.
Honestly, at the time, it was such a big deal for me. And Stomp, I don't know if it was a big deal for everybody. It felt like a big deal in general. So I guess I wasn't really, my mind was not in a place to really be thinking about like what I might be thinking about in any other stage of my adult life, of like, okay, this is good, or this is great. And also, gigs change, gigs end, or you don't want to do them anymore, or for whatever reason you transition on to the next thing. I really didn't have that in my mind at the time, but I was here. It was kind of a tricky trajectory, because I was hired, and so everybody that I was with, there was 4 of us that were hired at the same time. We were all told when we came in, you're going to train in New York, we'll get you into some shows here, and then you're all going out to tour. And so my mindset was, okay, well, I'm just here for a short time. So I wasn't thinking about like maybe subbing on a show or going and sitting with drummers and watching other shows or anything like that. I was like, okay, cool. I'm here to learn the show and be in it in New York. And then very soon after, I will go out to tour. But what ended up happening was I ended up being here for 9 months, because they ended up letting somebody go that was in the show, and they kept me here instead of putting me out to tour. So I ended up being in the New York company for about 9 months. And so I just ended up being sort of like, I'm in this show and this is my job and I'm here to do it. And then also strangely like waiting around, because they didn't really know when I was going to go out to tour. So I was just sort of in waiting, which in retrospect seems like maybe I could have made better use of that time. But I was going out and seeing, shows and seeing musicians and seeing gigs and stuff like that. But, I was 19, and so I couldn't even get in everywhere to see everything, because I wasn't of legal age to drink. And I didn't care about that at all. I just wanted to go see, Dennis Chambers or whoever was coming into town at whatever club that, was going on. And so I got to see some of those shows, which is awesome, including Dennis, who's one of my favorites. But yeah, so I guess I didn't reach out to other drummers or anything. It was just sort of that insular Stomp community.
What was the thing that got you into Broadway theater drumming?
After Stomp was finishing up when I was out on the tour, I wanted to come back and play. And so I started to look around and see what gigs everybody was playing. And at the same time, I had met my wife, who at the time we were dating, and she was on the tour of Saturday Night Fever. So I met that drummer, whose name escapes me right now. And he was really cool. And I was like, oh, right, there's like drummers that are out there touring, doing all these shows. And then she came to New York, and not that soon after her tour, she ended up booking Wicked. And when Wicked was happening, I don't know how this trajectory worked, but Gary Seligson, who was the original drummer for Wicked, who we both know, he was also playing over at Aida. And so I don't know how those crossed over, or maybe it was like Wicked workshop stuff, and he was still, I think that's probably what it was, and he was playing Aida at the same time before Wicked came to Broadway. And so I ended up sitting with Gary, meeting Gary through Wicked, I think in the very, very early stages, and then him being kind enough to have me sit with him and watch him play Aida, which I did. And then getting to watch him play Wicked when it was very early on Broadway. And so that was just sort of opened my eyes to like this whole world of drummers and work that was happening that I really was completely not clued into in any way. And then I ended up reaching out to like Ray Marchica, let me sit over at Mamma Mia and watch him play. And I don't know if you know Billy Miller, who was an amazing drummer, percussionist. But and so yeah, so I got to watch all these awesome drummers doing their thing. I got to watch Sean McDaniel play, and I subbed for Sean super early on when he was still subbing a lot for this off-Broadway show called Caligula. I don't know if you ever heard that one, but I got to sub for him there, which was really fun.
Was that your first introduction to subbing?
I think that was the very first thing I ever subbed in New York. I think so, because I think through Gary was like, talk to Sean. Sean is like the subbing, like he's subbing everywhere and he's amazing. And so I think Sean was kind enough to meet with me, and maybe we had like coffee or whatever like that. I bought him a coffee and kind of picked his brain a little bit, and he was kind enough to do that. And then he was playing that show, but subbing a lot of Broadway shows. And so he had a bunch of dates that he knew that he was not going to be available for Caligula, and so I ended up subbing for him there, which was really cool experience and a lot of fun, and the music was really fun and funky, and so yeah, I think that was my very, very first subbing experience in New York.
Subbing at that show and meeting Sean and meeting Gary and meeting Ray, that connected you to the network of Broadway and off-Broadway musicians. Did those connections help you get to where you are today as far as getting on the Cher show and any other Broadway shows that you eventually wound up playing on?
I think so. It's tricky. Like, you know, sometimes you don't know who has thrown your name in for what. And so I hope that I made a good impression on Sean or anybody else that let me sub, and that I, you know, was sort of, you know, my name was thrown in with other players as well to get opportunities. So I hope that helped. But sometimes people don't tell you necessarily who recommended you. They just call you and ask if you're available. And so I think it was definitely help from older players or players that were busy with their own shows and their own stuff who've thrown my name in the hat. And then, you know, I think it's definitely also benefited to be playing, you know, I played like a lot of like fringe festival shows and, you know, whatever other sort of developmental kind of things that are going on where you're still meeting all these music directors and people that are coming up themselves. And so that was really helpful, or benefit concerts and stuff like that. And so actually Daryl Waters, who was the music supervisor and orchestrator for Cher show, I knew him from my first chair in a show, which was Holler If You Hear Me, but I knew him because I had played a benefit concert with him. He was the MD for this benefit concert up in, I think in the Bronx or in Westchester. And he was a friend of the woman who was running it, et cetera. And so we ended up playing that. And you know, for anybody who's played those kind of benefit concerts, it's like people are bringing in their music and you know, they're throwing down whatever version on the stand, and it's almost always a piano vocal or a lead sheet if you're super lucky, and they get to run it once or twice, and then they got to get to the next person and the next person. And so it's like a little like trial by fire to be able to make it work, and then to, you know, play confidently and professionally after having very, very little rehearsal, and potentially play for some really A-list people that expect it to be at a high level with like very little time and help, and, you know, getting like, you know, a 12-page piano vocal that like you're turning 18 million pages while you're playing with one hand, and you've written in your notes and they made sense earlier, and now I hope they still make sense. And then, you know, the you know, the singer, the actor decides they're gonna like, you know, do something on the spot, and then that changes. And so like there's lots of that where like I think if you can do it well, it is an opportunity for music directors to see you sort of like in action in the midst of like what is not a very well-regulated, sort of simple, straightforward, well-rehearsed situation where you just go in and you do exactly what you did in rehearsal, and it's all properly charted and properly, everything's been discussed properly. Like it's much wilder than that. And so I think those kind of scenarios, like with Daryl, help people kind of get a feel for what you are capable of, even though hopefully in a Broadway workshop or rehearsal or show, it's all like a little bit more settled by that point. But I think that helped to know him when I got recommended for Holler.
So correct me if I'm wrong, but Damon Duwhite was the drummer for Holler, if you hear me correct.
He sure was.
Yes. Yeah. I talked to him a while ago, and he was telling me about sometimes, I don't know if it was on that show, but sometimes if you're having a lot of fun in the pit, the show doesn't last very long.
So I was the percussionist on that show. Damon was the drummer. And yes, I specifically remember Barry Danielian, who is the trumpet player. He was like, everybody was having a good time, and it was just like good vibes in the pit. And we weren't even in the pit. We were in another room because we couldn't even all fit in the pit at that theater. So it was just a really, really fun hang. And that was like the immediate discussion was like, oh boy, we're having too much fun. This is not going to last. And I was like, no, don't even speak that into existence. Like, this is my first chair in a show, or it doesn't matter if it's your first, I have a chair in a show finally. I hope it lasts. And it didn't end up lasting, but yes, that was a wild experience. Damon is a great drummer and also an absolutely stand-up guy, because I came into that show through the choreographer, Wayne Salento, and not through a traditional means of the MD, who was Zane Mark, who's also a great friend and also.
Oh yeah, Zane's great.
Zane is great. And so Zane was the MD and Daryl Waters was the supervisor. I did not know Zane at all, and I knew Daryl only through that one random benefit gig. And so I really sort of got shoved in there by Wayne, the choreographer, because I ended up playing a bunch of auditions for the dancers for the show, and he liked what I was doing and he wanted me in the room. But then Damon was already there, and so there was already a drummer, and so then there was like kind of two drummers in the room. And so long story short, it was kind of a wacky process, but Damon was so just really warm, and I didn't know Damon at all as well. And so he was just really warm and welcoming, as was Zane, as was Daryl and the music department. And it was just one of those scenarios where it could have gone a number of different ways. And because of those guys and their ability to be like welcoming and work with me, it ended up being a really great experience for me, when it could have just been tough and weird. And quite frankly, like, white guy coming into black show with all black creative team, except for Wayne, the choreographer, and
Tupac,
black music department. Like, I'm like, hey guys, like it's, it could have gone a couple of ways. And so it ended up being a really great experience because of those guys.
Understanding music and the language of music has led you, I guess, opportunities to play with, I guess you play with Cher and Andrea Bocelli and Titus Burgess, Kelly O'Hara, Montego Glover, who worked with me at, actually, I work with her at Memphis.
You work together. How's that?
Yes. And Randy Rainbow. And did you work with the Wu-Tang Clan too?
I did, in a sense. So I trained martial arts. I trained Kung Fu for also about 12 years.
Wait, did you ever spar with Damon Duwhite?
I did not, and I would never, because he looks like a statue that should be in a museum. He's amazing.
Chiseled, I know, man.
No, I will not. No, we can trade fills or something instead. But no, I have no interest in sparring with Damon. But so I trained Kung Fu at USA Shaolin Temple, and that particular temple is the master there, whose name is Xian Ming, who is my Kung Fu master and Buddhist master. His wife of many years, they're no longer together, but his partner and wife for a very long time was the manager of the Wu-Tang Clan. And so through her, they were obsessed with all these old Kung Fu movies. And through her, they ended up meeting my Kung Fu master, who ended up being RZA's Kung Fu master, and other guys from Wu-Tang Clan ended up coming in and training at the temple. And so it was a whole connection. And so they were doing some reunion concerts in New York. And I was part of the, like what they call like the demo team, where we would go out and do demonstrations and stuff like that. But I would also play drums and play this big Chinese drum that kind of looks like a taiko drum, but the Chinese version of that. And so I would go out and I would play that drum as part of the demo stuff. And we had this guy whose name is Hung Fa, who's also a disciple of the temple, who's an incredible DJ. Sometimes he would be DJing and do like spinning all this stuff, and I'd be playing drums. It was super fun. And so RZA asked if we would come and do a bunch of Shaolin Kung Fu stuff on stage during their reunion concert, which was at whatever that big stadium is in New Jersey. And then we ended up doing it at Webster Hall as well. And while that was happening, they obviously had their people that were spinning and DJing that were up there. And so I was playing this big Chinese drum for some of their songs, as there were like, 50 people on stage, like just everybody just hanging out and doing Kung Fu, and different, members of Wu-Tang coming up and doing their verse on whatever song we were on, and that kind of stuff. And so I don't want to say that I played with the Wu-Tang Clan, but I played with the Wu-Tang Clan.
If you're playing with this level of musician and professional, you don't get to do that unless you're as good as you are. So hats off to you, first of all, for being able to do what you do and sound as good as you do. And you wouldn't be playing on America's Got Talent or Wicked or Little Shop of Horrors or The Cher Show without having your level of ability and capability. So
thank you. That's very
cool. If I had a hat, I'd take it off.
Definitely mine off for myself.
What got you the gig as the drummer for The Cher Show?
What got me the gig was Daryl Waters. Daryl Waters was in the workshop phase of the show and needed somebody to come in and play for the last week of the process. And that was early on when they were still figuring everything out. And he called me to come in. And I, of course, was happy to hear from him. Because I hadn't heard from him in a while, because that's, the weirdness of our business is that people can know you and you can know them, and then, your paths go different ways, and then you don't know if people even know that you're around or remember who you are, and then all of a sudden you get these calls that they're like, oh yeah, I just didn't have anything that made sense or was right for you, and now this thing is up, and are you available? And so he kind of called out of the blue, and I was able to come in, and I didn't know Andrew Resnick, who was the MD, at all. And so, it was a little bit of I don't know what will happen here. Obviously, I'm going to come in and play as best I can and represent myself as best I can and play the music and et cetera. And it ended up working out, and I got along really well with Andrew, who's a fantastic MD and pianist, and also a very good drummer, as it turns out. And so he... I guess I passed his test as well, because he's, sort of not somebody who's unaware of what's going on with the drums, or it's not like sometimes, people aren't necessarily that keyed into how drums work, and maybe they can say, yes, it works or it doesn't, but they don't really know why. exactly where they couldn't articulate that, but he very much can. And so between the two of them, I guess I got the okay that it was going to work out. And then I didn't know the contractor for the show, who's Dean Scher now. I don't know if you know Dean, but I did not know him at all. I had never met him. And he's kind of a man of few words, and he kind of has a stern face about him naturally. And so he came in for a presentation that we did. And he was nice and very cordial, but you know, I mean, I had just met the guy, and so I felt like I was kind of auditioning for everybody, even though I was hired to do the workshop. And then Daryl asked if I would like to go out of town for the out of town run of the show, and so I said yes, and so we did. And then when we were out of town, we did the sits probe. And for anybody who hasn't been part of a sits probe of a new show, like they are, and I'm sure Clayton, you've had this experience, but like they are, everything is like down to the wire, and changes are being made, and then they'll be made after the sits probe as well. It's like never this, all these changes that are going on, but the actors and the creative team and the producers and all these people are coming in to like, I've learned from talking to the actors about this. They're coming in to have this fun moment of the sits probe of like, we get to hear the music with the full orchestra, and they've already rehearsed their parts are set. I mean, they'll probably change again, but their parts are pretty set, and they've worked with the MD and with the associate and whoever. So they're coming in like ready to sing all the stuff that they've been singing, and you're coming in and potentially looking at some very, very fresh charts that have just been put together, that are also potentially, because when you're in the workshop process, you could be playing to a piano vocal until the very end of it. And then someone other than you is then translating all of your parts into a drum chart. But that takes often a lot of back and forth to sort of get it right. And so you might be looking at something that you really have not been looking at for months. And then you're in a sits probe where everybody's like, let's run it. And all the actors are like, yay. And they get up and they sing, and they're on the microphone, and they're like living their dream moment. And they're, you know, they've got their phone, and they're doing this whole thing, and they're having a great time. And it's totally awesome. But what they don't realize, and what I realized from talking to a friend of mine about it recently, who is an actor, they don't realize that the band is like potentially like almost sight reading some of this material, where they're having this moment. And so we're playing through all of it, and Dean, once again, is there. And I don't think I've ever told him the story either, but he's there, and he's just sitting, and, you know, he's dealing with 8 million things that the contractors have to deal with. So who knows if he was even really listening that intently to what I was doing. But we made it through the first half of the day, and then it was lunch. And then he comes up to me and he's like, you want to have lunch? And we really don't know each other at all. And he was like, do you want to go have lunch? And I was like, sure. But in my mind, I was like, I think I'm getting fired, because I really didn't know him at all. And he's also a drummer who has had his own shows, etc. And so I was kind of like, I think I did okay, but, you know, and I'm always going to be critical of myself and my playing, but I was like, I think I did all right, but maybe he's really not into it. And then Sinai Tabak, who's an incredible musician in his own right, who was the associate on that show, and is currently the associate on Beautiful Noise. He knew Dean from other shows and stuff like that. And then within like 5 minutes, Dean was like, Sinai, you want to come have lunch with us? And I was like, oh, okay, we're just having lunch. I'm not getting fired. And it was just a nice lunch, and there was none of that going on, but you just never really know. And so it all culminated in it making it to Broadway and coming back, and then changing a million things, and me getting to have that chair.
Did he say anything about your playing during the lunch?
He didn't say a thing about it. He was much more trying to figure out who might, you know, be the right people to, when it looked like it was definitely going to Broadway, who might be the right people to be in the orchestra, and just sort of gaming it out a little bit, which I was honored to even be sitting there, because often those discussions happen like totally away from us. And so, no, we were kind of chatting about that and just sort of getting to know each other a little bit. And I was learning a little about him and the shows that he had done and his background and that kind of stuff. And he does a ton of studio stuff as well. And so we kind of had that in common. But so, no, we didn't, I don't know if we have ever talked about my drumming other than him being in the room at the same time and just hanging out a little bit.
So you had the share show and you were hanging out with the people in the pit. Did you guys have a good time hanging out together?
We had a great time. I had a lot of fun down there. I get along with everybody. That's like sort of an easy, like that's sort of my way of being, is that I like to like know everybody and I like to get along with everybody and find stupid jokes and just ways to have fun, because it's a fun experience, or I'll rephrase that. It should be a fun experience. We get to play music with other awesome musicians and make a pretty nice paycheck and have stability and have amazing sound and sound design and, like have this, it's, there's a lot of really great things about having a chair in a show. So like, let's enjoy it and have fun and enjoy the process. And, sometimes it can not necessarily be that way, but I think it's just a shame if it's ever that way, because
You think about it though, if you have a bad experience, then you'll have a show that runs for 35 years.
I know. That's going back to Barry's comment.
Exactly.
It's the same thing. It's so true. It's like the idea, and I've subbed and I would guess that you've probably run into a situation like this, either with a show that was yours or that you subbed on, where it's just dark. It's just dark in the pit for whatever reason, the combination of personalities or how it's been run, or God knows, a million different things that could have happened. But it's like, wow, like it's such a shame. It's like music is such a gift to be able to do, and to do professionally and to do with other great players. It's like, it is such a beautiful opportunity to like squander that, or to sort of clock in and clock out like it's, not an artistic endeavor, or it's just a day job and I just come and do this thing and I'm just this function, and like we are a function and we are sort of a cog in this crazy thing that is happening. But at the same time, it's like, it's just such a gift. And so I always look for those opportunities to connect and have fun and enjoy the experience. And, I mean, the blessing of playing the drums is that they are loud. And so they put you in a booth most of the time. Which means that you can be friends with everybody and then you can go away. You know what I mean? So like, there's much less, like it was tricky at Cher, the other side of the pit, there was like the horns that were on sort of my side on stage right. And they had a decent amount of space for the fact that there was only 3 of them. And then everybody was on the other side and they were really crammed in there. And so, that's tricky. It's like, there's like pedals and wires and instruments and everything everywhere. And like people have to get up and move out of the way for somebody to go to the bathroom. And like it was pretty tight. It was not a very like open, ideal kind of space. And so I was thankful that because that's tricky, not everybody's having the best day every day, and it's extremely close quarters. So I find it, I was in there, I had like TheraBands and I was like, I can take a nap in there in between shows and I can have my whole setup and, I can have shelves and all the things that drummers have in their rooms. And so you have a little space. And so, we're kind of, just the luck of the nature of the instrument, we kind of get that most of the time.
Tell me how you started getting into your studio and recording, and what are you doing right now with all that?
Sure. I got into recording, excuse me, because I came back off of the Stomp tour, and when I was 23, and I was ready to like slide right into like working in New York, whatever that meant. And I guess I think that probably meant Broadway shows. And then whatever I envisioned was like session work or whatever I thought was going to be sort of the next thing. And that very much did not happen, or at least certainly did not happen in a way that I had envisioned, or that would pay my rent. And so I started to think about other ways that I could use my music skills to make a living. And I thought about teaching, and I enjoy teaching, and I have taught in the past. And I'm still open to it, but it's not like my absolute passion. I have to teach. Like some people, they really are clear that teaching is part of their trajectory of what they need to do, or what they really, really want to do. And I'm like semi on that. I think it's super important to pass it down to people. And I'm so grateful for my teachers who pass it down to me, and I wouldn't be able to do what I do without all those people. But it is not a direct passion for me. And so, but recording and being in studios, I've always been very interested in, and I've always been very excited about, the process of recording. And I always thought, I'm not like a traditional music director type of person. And so I'm not a piano player or maybe a guitar player. And so it's not usually, at least for me, it's not the same trajectory as being a typical music director, but maybe I can assemble all of these amazing musicians that I have met along the way to make music in studios, because it's not always like a traditional music director trajectory. And so I wanted to get into it for all those reasons. And I just wanted to use my skills for something else that was a part of the business that I had no connection to, other than like waiting around for the phone to ring to be called as a session musician. But, New York it's not 1985 where it's like, all these like classic legendary session musicians where there's like all these big studios around and there's all these sessions going on all the time. That was how it was. That is not how it is. That's a completely different world. Recording is a completely different world than it used to be. And so it happens differently. It still happens all the time, but it does not happen the way, that old school way where you're waiting around for a contractor to call you to come in and play jingles and play all these other things. And they pay you a bunch of money, or you have points on the session, or all those kinds of things. Like that is not the current climate and has not been for a very long time. And so I got into it for all those reasons, and it's just continued. And so I'm very, very thankful that along with drumming, I get to produce and I get to record and mix and engineer and do all of that sort of stuff. And it's great. It's great because it's a different avenue that still allows me to make music. And also it's great because the nature of recording is that it's always new, because the only reason in general why people are recording things is because it is a new idea or a new song or a new whatever that they are trying to create. And so it's the opposite of Broadway, where in the Broadway world, you're, especially if you're in a long running show, you are looking for ways to keep it fresh, and you're looking for ways to like keep the excitement and not turn into a curmudgeon and not be like, here we go again, where it's like, and I've certainly felt that way as well at times, certainly in Stomp because it was there for so long, and you can just feel that way. Meanwhile, like other people are like dying to have their own show. But it's different when you're in there, and it's a different trajectory. But with recording, all of that is completely different. It's a completely different set of skills, and it's also a completely different goal of what you're trying to accomplish, and the sort of standard by which you're trying to accomplish that. You're not trying to recreate anything. You're trying to get the best possible outcome and the best possible recording and product with whatever materials you've been given, and so it's creative and very challenging and an extremely steep learning curve, because when things don't go right, if things don't go right on a drum fill in a show, you're like, damn, that drum fill didn't really happen the way I wanted it to. Here we go with the rest of the everything. But like if you record something and it doesn't go well, like it can be not usable, or you can be like just spinning your wheels trying to make lemonade out of lemons, but it doesn't work and it sounds bad and it has to be re-recorded and redone, or it's a very steep learning curve when things are not working properly in a recording studio at any point in the process. And so it's very challenging, but when it does work and it does happen, it's also very gratifying.
What was your favorite show to play and why?
Oh boy. I would say my favorite show is probably Stomp, because it was a very life-changing experience and it was incredibly challenging, and also the exposure to the musicians that were there. There were some dancers and some drummers and actors, but some of the drummers that were there, like all these Brazilian drummers that are like straight from Bahia, that are like percussionists, like people that maybe you would like if it was collegiate kind of setting, or even if you were going to PASIC or wherever, or like you get to like take a master class from these types of people, but you wouldn't actually get to spend hours and hours and shows upon shows upon shows on stage playing with them. And so that kind of experience, and other players who were not necessarily Brazilian, but like other like unbelievable drum set players or unbelievable percussionists who were coming in, that you don't always get to have that opportunity. You can learn from those people, or you could take a lesson from those people, but then they're like going to go on and they're going to go play with whoever, like some big famous Latin artist or Brazilian artist or whatever artist. And so you got that cool lesson and it was inspiring, but you don't necessarily get to just like hang and make music with them on the daily. So I would say, for a million reasons, that was really sort of a life-changing gig and experience.
If somebody sees this or hears this and is interested in playing shows, Broadway, off Broadway, or just coming to New York to be a professional musician, with your experience, what would you tell them? And with your experience that you've had, what would you tell them is the one thing that they should know in order to be a success in New York City?
I would say the one thing is to come in as prepared as humanly possible. But what I mean by that is, obviously, if you are given anything in advance, musically speaking, that you come in and you know exactly what all of it, everything that needs to happen musically is, and that you've taken the time, if it makes sense for the situation, to write it out, to chart it out. These days, everybody's got their iPad happening, including me, to take whatever notes need to happen. Like coming in absolutely as ready as possible, because at the end of the day, there are so many factors that are completely out of your control, like what drum set you sit down at, what people are asking of you in the moment when you're in the room, a million things. And so to be as ready as possible, and that also means learning and having your drumming together in a way that you are adaptable to different situations, because a lot of the times my experience has been, by the time you need to pull out your toolbox of things that you know how to do, you just got to be able to pull it out. Like there's no like, let me go shed this thing that is on the page in front of me right now, and by the time I come back, I'll be ready to go. Like there's never any time for that. And also, you live in New York City, and so that means, oh boy, I have to go to the grocery store. I have to go food shopping. I have to do my laundry. I have to do this. My water is off this week. The air conditioner broke. Like New York is already a crazy scenario to live in, and so there's really not enough time to be able to go like you might have done when you didn't live here, and just go like work on stuff in a quiet and peaceful way. And so, or you have another job that's your survival job that you have to go to, and you can't be learning how to, shed whatever mambo that came up on the page or whatever, when you're busy working at your job. And so it's just one of those things where you have to be able to come in and just be uber prepared for whatever it is. And that also allows you to be able to pivot quickly, if you get thrown something that is not just an immediate, you can just pull it out and do it immediately. If you're prepared and know the music well, or just know the scenario well, then you can get it together quickly, or quickly enough that you can, represent yourself well.
As someone who's done a show like Stomp, which is very, very physical, drumming is physical as well. And there can be injuries with drumming, dancing like Stomp, or just sitting down behind a drum set. How do you go about avoiding drumming injuries?
That's a great question. I think the most important way to avoid them, and this doesn't really apply to subbing because it is not your drum set that you're on, but if you are going to be playing at any of your own gigs or rehearsing or practicing anywhere where you're at a drum set for a very long time, it has to be ergonomic. And you have to really put in some thought into what is the easiest way to accomplish playing. And, sometimes people grow up playing certain ways because that's how they set it up when they were a kid, or they saw their favorite drummer set up a particular way. But, you never know, if you were watching like Aerosmith in the 80s and Joey Kramer's cymbals are 10 feet high, like that was a stylistic choice at that time for a lot of players. That was not an ergonomic choice in any way. So I think it kind of is in your best interest to really take a look at who is doing it in the easiest way possible, because it avoids injury. Just like that, like the same thing you're talking about, I set up my ride in a way that I can reach it without having to reach too far out. Because at the end of the day, you want to be sitting like the guys that or the drummers, not guys, men and women and whoever, that I really study and look at to say, you know what, they're just sitting there. They don't look like they're reaching for anything. Like Dennis Chambers, he looks like he's just sitting there. His posture is nice. He's relaxed. He's sitting very upright when he plays, and he plays like a mother. He plays so, like, it's so incredible. Or like Teddy Campbell, who I really love, who is on American Idol forever and has played for a million people. He is just relaxed and sitting there and playing. You never see him reaching far for anything. Or obviously, like, people like Dave Weckl, people that really obsess over that kind of stuff. Like, I think it's worth putting in the effort to figure that out. And so I always try to make sure that I'm doing that. And then just like, looking at your actual technique and looking at things that are old habits that might not be serving you anymore, or just continuing to work on things that allow you to play comfortably, and not stress your body, in funky ways. That Stomp kind of exacerbates all those things very quickly, and you're doing a lot of unnatural things, and so you learn by error, by getting injured. It's not a great way to learn necessarily, but it happens a little more quickly because of the force that you are applying on your body, because of the nature of these brooms and poles and instruments that are not natural. You get injured more quickly, which is not great, but you learn. The learning curve is also steep for that. And so, it's a good way to learn those things, and to really take a look at how you're playing, and to, you study some people for their playing and what really inspires and how you want to be as a player. But you can also study some other folks that I will not name, that are less inspiring players for me personally, but technically they are very sound, and it gives them longevity.
The experience, I guess, Radio City, was it?
Radio City was where America's Got Talent was shot. So we did every week we were there.
With a live audience.
Yes. So yeah, every week was a very pumped up live audience.
Okay, so look, again, this is Broadway Drumming 101. You want to learn how to play on Broadway? It's amazing being in the pit. But
yes.
Would you rather be at Radio City in front of 6,000 people or in a pit?
I would rather be at Radio City for sure. I think everybody, I think everybody grows up seeing those things. I used to see like, Billy Joel with Liberty DeVito at Shea Stadium. I'd like watch those videos and stuff like that. And of course, it's like, it's epic. It's epic when, it's funny, like the pinnacle of that would obviously be if you are in an actual band and it is your music.
Right.
When it's not, it's definitely like a bit of a different experience because it's weird. You're like there and doing it and clearly part of the scenario that's going on that these people are all watching. But you're like supportive of whoever. And even if you're playing for Beyonce and playing for Lady Gaga or whoever like that, you're obviously there in a supportive role because they are the star and you can most likely walk out of that venue and walk right into the crowd and no one will actually know who you are. But the experience of playing for people and them getting to see it and experience it and share that experience, there is definitely nothing like it. And it is an awesome experience and really fun. And yeah, and I think there's something that I really enjoy strangely as well about playing in a pit in a different way where like you just close the door and it's a little bit sort of more like being a session musician where you're just there to make those sounds. You're not, it doesn't really matter what you look like. Nobody cares if it's in any way performative. If you're looking around and connected to other people, if the audience likes what you're doing, if you look cool, if whatever, like you're just there to sound as good as possible. And to accomplish this thing that we're all doing together. Like I do enjoy the weird anonymity of that. But then on the flip side, literally the second I walk out of the stage door and there's all those people that are standing there with their programs and they want to get signatures of people that were part of the show. It's this weird thing where like you just went and played your ass off for the show and they have no idea who you are, what you did. Like sometimes you come out and people like kind of applaud for you because they can see like you did something there, but they have no clue what your place is within this community. And so, yeah, that's kind of like a funny, weird scenario where like, if you're in Stomp, you're like an actor, your face is in the playbill and people saw you do this thing on stage. And so it's like a little bit more like you are known by all those people. So it's definitely a different trajectory, but no, being on stage is amazing.
You're a fellow Paiste endorser. I love those symbols. I never really knew too much about them, but Carl Latham introduced me to them and I'm like, oh my God, this line and this line, they all have their own specific sound. Fantastic symbols.
Yeah, I love them. I use them every day.
One last question. What projects are you working on at the moment?
It's a good question. I just finished producing, really engineering and helping produce 16 songs for a lot of musicals these days come to studios and they put together almost entire albums so that they can pitch to potential investors and producers early on in the process. And so there is a composer who passed away named Cy Coleman, who was working on a musical when he passed. And so a friend of mine and music director named Aaron Gandy was kind enough to hire me to come in and we recorded 16 songs for this musical that they are working on. And so I recorded and mixed and edited and all that stuff. That guy, and then I'm producing music for a few new artists and people that are up and coming and trying to get their music out there, including Michaela Diamond, who we did Cher Show together. She was the young Cher. Now she is in Parade and doing great. And so I produced an EP for her and for her partner at the time, Nathan, and then and now she is doing a solo record that we're in development for. So we're working on that. And then like today, I have a kind of like a hip hop R&B session coming in for a singer who is a songwriter and is trying to get all his material together. And so it's just sort of like and then on Friday, there's like a way out, really interesting, like new music. Like there's no time signature, there's no tempo, there's no key. It is like in the moment improv, like we're just in space and like sound is happening. Like it's like a whole world that I know literally nothing about other than studying what this woman Sarah has sent me for reference. And so they'll come in on Friday and do that. So just all kinds of funky stuff.
So if somebody wants to record with you, how do they reach out to you?
You can reach out. The name of the studio is Pencil Factory Recording. So if you look online at pencilfactoryrecording.com, we are there. And then you can obviously reach out to me through my website, which is danweinerdrums.com. And that comes right to me. And so those are probably the two easiest ways to reach out if you want to come record. But it's great. It's fun and creative, and we have all kinds of fun. The grand piano here, we just got a B3 with a Leslie cabinet, which is pretty remarkable. And there's a Rhodes here and all kinds of crazy percussion instruments. So it's a fun studio to work in and work out of and make new stuff.
Amazing. Thank you, Dan Weiner.
Thank you so much for having me on. It's great. I love what you do. I think this is awesome. And so I wish that there was something like this when I was coming up. It would have been so informative in so many ways. So thank you for doing this. It's awesome.
Thank you. And we'll talk soon.
Awesome.
All right.
Thanks.
Bye.